Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and start. First off, welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Susan Kremen, and I'm the Director of Marketing with Tech Service Today. I would like to introduce you to our speakers, Courtney Baethke and William Hull, who will take you through the best practices for IT rollouts in the real estate and property management industries. Courtney Baethke brings over 5 years of experience helping property management companies efficiently and effectively deploy large-scale network and telecom infrastructure, AV, AP Wi-Fi, CCTV, operating systems, access control, cabling, and other low-voltage projects across the U.S. and Canada. Courtney graduated cum laude with a degree in business management from Florida Atlantic University. William is a VP of Business Development at Tech Service Today and brings over 20 years of project management experience in a variety of industries, including IT infrastructure, healthcare, real estate and property management, restaurant, hospitality, retail, and performance improvement. William also holds a master's certificate in project management from the George Washington School of Business. And I'm now going to hand it over to Will.
Good morning or afternoon, everybody, depending on your time zone. Really appreciate you taking some time to join us today for this informative webinar. I promise you it is going to be about information and not a big sales pitch. We're doing this to help our customers and prospective customers learn how we operate and learn some best practices, which makes everybody's life easier when you're doing IT infrastructure rollouts. Right now, everybody on the conference is muted. We will unmute everybody at the end to open it up for questions. You can also, if you look at your GoToWebinar toolbar, you can see that there's a little place where you can ask questions. You can also send us a chat, and we can take questions in that way. So if you think of any that you don't want to hold to the end, just went ahead and type it in during, that's fine. But we are going to hold on stuff to the end. And we're going to be quick about this. We want to make sure that we're off by 2 o'clock Eastern, or I'm on the Pacific Coast, so 11 o'clock my time, because we know your days are very busy. So great, thanks for joining us, and we're going to jump right on into it. So the key to projects of any kind, including IT rollouts, is the importance of planning in advance. The work that you do at the front end of a project does more to establish how the project's going to go than at any other point in the process. And I'm going to show you a little graph that you probably have seen before. I've seen it a million times in project management classes. If you've ever taken a project management class, it's usually one of the first slides that they show. And that's because it's so important to understanding the essence of project management and planning. And what you can see on this graph is time is going from left to right. So at the left side of the graph, we're at the very beginning of the project. At the right side of the graph, we're at the end. And you can see two lines there. The orange line reflects the amount of influence, the control that you have over the project. The green line represents the costs that you have sunk into the project over time. At the beginning of the project, you haven't spent any money, and you've got a very wide range of options because you haven't made any decisions yet. And as you can see, over time, as you make decisions, you constrain what other options you have moving forward, and those decisions cost you money, and that's money that you can't recover. So the point of this is to say that planning in advance is key to making a project work. The other point here is that you want to be looking for potential problems and risks. The more that you can anticipate problems and risks and mitigate them, plan for them, the better the project is going to go. And the time to do that is immediately upon starting the project. You really want to avoid rose-colored glasses. Things are not always going to go as planned. There are going to be some contingencies to come up that, you know, are going to be those unknown unknowns, things that come up that, wow, you never even thought of that before. But it's important when you start a project to be looking ahead to what could go wrong. What have you seen that's gone wrong? Hopefully your company, when you manage projects, you have a closeout process that includes lessons learned. Make sure that you're reviewing those. And the other thing is that if you're working with a third-party provider, be TST or someone else or just independent contractors out in the field, whoever they are, that you're checking in with them and bringing them into the mix as soon as possible. We find that the sooner customers bring us into the mix to talk about projects, the better it goes, because we do these kinds of projects all the time. You know, we do hundreds of these projects a year because we're dealing with hundreds of different customers. So although we're not as knowledgeable as you guys are in the underlying technologies that you have, because you obviously work with your software packages and et cetera on a hourly basis, we do a lot more projects than really even any big company, just because of the number of different customers we have. So there's a lot of knowledge that we can bring to the table and other third parties can bring to the table. So whoever you're using, bring them into the process as soon as possible in the planning phase. Okay, very good. All right, I'm going to now turn it over to Courtney to talk about detailed instructions and installation documents. So take it away, Court.
Thanks, Will. A very important part of the rollout is having detailed instruction documents for technicians to follow while they are on site. This should include all scope of work that needs to be done, as well as include as much detail as possible to avoid any kind of mistakes or misses. This instruction document could include pictures and diagrams to explicitly show what needs to be done. We really recommend having pictures, as they tend to simplify things and make it easier for the technicians to follow direction while they are on site. Another good part to include in the instruction document is frequently asked questions section. In case there are any questions you believe the technician may run into, you can list all of these specific questions with answers in this section to avoid any unneeded phone calls, which will help decrease the extra time that may be spent on site trying to get these answered with your help desk. You may also want to validate, these documents after they are made with the technicians. You want to review them during the pilot sites prior to the rollout to make sure that everything makes sense and no changes need to be made. We deal with these things every day. However, the field technicians will not have the same familiarity, so it is very important to run this with someone prior to the actual rollout. This leads us to our next segment, which is site preparedness, which I'm going to hand back over to Will to discuss.
Thanks, Court. Yeah, site preparedness is a big key for project success. You want to make sure that the on-site personnel, especially the managers at your properties, understand the importance of the project and how it impacts them day to day. Getting buy-in from people on the field makes everybody's life easier, because the reality is that you can't make this project run well if you don't have compliance from people out in the field, because they're controlling the technician's access to the site, having everything there, having everything ready to go. There's way too many project delays that happen because the on-site personnel aren't prepared for the rollout, and generally that's because they don't understand why it's important to them and why it's important that they comply with all of your instructions and be on time. So we really recommend that you have a kickoff conference call with your property personnel. If you can include somebody from the business unit management in addition to IT management, that usually helps get people's attention. It's good for them to explain the project, what's going on with it, and explain how it's impacting them and how it's going to improve their lives. Because if they're bought into the project, then they're far more likely to take it seriously, and then it's not just an order from above, but it becomes something that they're really actively participating in because they see what the benefit is for them. You want to make sure that all of the necessary equipment is on site, and that will involve coordinating it maybe with whatever company is doing the imaging for your machines. Let's say you're rolling out new PCs for a leasing office, for instance. Maybe you're working with CDW or some other company to do the imaging. You want to make sure that that's all taken care of. You need to track the packages and make sure that you check in with the sites that they've got the equipment. Don't just rely on a FedEx or UPS or another shipper's indication that the package has been delivered. Make sure you're checking in with somebody on site to ensure that they've received the package and you know who's received the package. And the other thing to be really clear with your sites about, and this is a good thing to cover in your kickoff calls and your follow-up emails and calls with them, is that they have a secure location where they're keeping the equipment. We have definitely had customers who on occasion have had equipment walk away. Sometimes it's because a site manager, realizes that this is important equipment and they take it home because they want to keep it for safekeeping and then they forget to bring it back. There are cases when equipment, and this especially seems to happen with PCs and access points, wireless access points, they do sometimes walk away with an employee, which is not a good thing. So it's good for you to have a defined space and if you can do it for every single location so you don't have to think about where it is at each location, that's the best. Manager's office where it's going to be secure and you know when the technician arrives on site where the equipment is, it's there, they grab it, they go. There's nothing worse than a technician showing up and the management is there, they're there with the keys, they're ready to go, and nobody can find the equipment. That's not a good situation. You also want to make sure that you're making reminder calls and emails to the customer the day before you're arriving at your IT customer sites. Remind them, where they need to be, when they need to be there, because you want to make sure you've got the right people there on site with keys, access codes, whatever's necessary, so they can provide access, and make sure they're there early. And these calls are important because depending on the project, it's not unusual that you're having people work out of hours because you don't, like say with a leasing office, you don't want to disrupt the leasing office operations. So people are either needing to come in early or stay late in order to give the technician access that they need. So make sure that everybody is reminded on this and that the site is prepared and that you're not going to run into any delays based upon technician access and having the equipment there. Now, I would say that if there was any one slide that is really the most important slide in this deck, it's the one we're looking at now, which is about pilot sites. In our experience, failure to pilot large projects is the #1 cause of projects going over budget, not meeting their deadlines, or not delivering the full scope of functionality that the end user is expecting. It is very dangerous to just roll something out over lots of locations and think that you've got it all covered. The old saying, I don't know if it was Clausewitz or who exactly said that, any plan of battle never survives the first encounter with the enemy. And, the reality generally is with projects that your project plan doesn't entirely survive, your first few visits out in the field because you're encountering things that you weren't expecting. So we really recommend that you do somewhere between 3 and 20 pilot sites before you've got your full rollout schedule to make sure that you've got everything locked tight and you don't run into any surprises. It really just depends on the size of the project. If you're only doing, say, 30 locations, 3 is probably enough. On the other hand, if you're rolling out to over 1,000 locations, it's a good job. It's a good idea to take about 20 sites and do some pilots with them. You want to make sure that you're, picking a mix of different sites in terms of maybe different business units they're a part of, different geographical regions, different brands depending on how your organization is structured, so that you're getting a reasonable sample, so that you're not overlooking some specific problems that you may have that's specific to a region or a brand or something like that. You want to make sure that the instructions are effective. We've talked about the importance of that earlier. Courtney talked about that. It's important to validate that with the technicians. with any third party that you're working with. But it's also good to just get out in the field and see what happens when people use these documents to make sure that everything's clear. Sometimes things that are clear to you because you're dealing with the system every single day are not necessarily clear to somebody who isn't using it every single day. So piloting is a way to make sure that your instructions, your FAQs are really clear. You can find unforeseen problems. What happens sometimes is that when people plan projects, they do it, again, with what I talked about before, those rose-colored glasses. And they sometimes lose touch of the reality out in the field. And I'll give you an example of something that happened with a customer previously with us. This was a restaurant customer who will remain nameless. And they were rolling out access point swap outs at over a couple thousand locations across North America. And when they came to us, what they said was, well, this should take about 15 minutes to half an hour. You show up, the technician unplugs and unbolts the old access point, they plug in and rebolt in the new access point, they call our help desk, they test the AP, everything's good to go. Half an hour at a most, probably more like 15 to 20 minutes on average. We said, okay. They insisted on not piloting, and we just went for it. Huge schedule. We had 30 to 50 techs every day out in the field. Well, here's what they found. Number one, there were a lot of locations where they hadn't reminded people. The equipment hadn't arrived, which I talked about on that first slide. And so either they weren't able to complete the work because the equipment wasn't there, or the people that were supposed to let them in weren't. They didn't have the right keys, so there were delays for that. Then what they discovered was that most of these access points were placed above the tiles in drop ceilings. So there was no way to simply walk in and visually see where these were located, and that at most of these locations, they didn't have any documentation of where the access points were located. So the technicians were having to go popping tiles, looking around, trying to use their, the Wi-Fi bars on their phone or their laptop to try to triangulate where the thing was. Maybe somebody at the property would remember where it was put when it would, had been placed a couple of years ago. It created a lot of delays. Then what they had discovered as well was that once they had found them and placed them, replaced the new access point, that there were infrastructure problems, that there were bad connectors or bad lines, that new home runs needed to be installed because they just hadn't noticed that a lot of these access points were not actually appearing on their network. So it caused a lot of problems. And so instead of taking 20 minutes, we're talking about hours on site. So they had to put a screeching halt to the project really after 2 days because they were running into all these problems. They had to take time to go do an audit to see where they weren't able to see access points on the network currently and do the best they could to try and find documentation on where the existing access points were located. And we were able to start the project up again, but there was over a week delay just in that. And so it did cause delays in the project, and the average time to completion ended up being more like an hour and 15 minutes once all this stuff was taken into account and they were able to make some changes. So they lost several weeks of time. They wasted several $1,000s because of this. And had they piloted some sites, in fact, really had 1 day of pilots would have revealed these problems. And if they had planned for that, they could have avoided the wasted money and the delay in the schedule. So that's just one example of why it's so important to do pilots, so that you find these unforeseen problems. That way everybody understands the SOW. You can revise your instructions, your procedures, and then you get real good estimated completion times. One of the things that we run into, and this story is a good example of it, is what I call the "it should take" phenomenon. Well, it should take this. It should take that. And the person that originally estimated the project, when they said it should take 20 minutes per site, Well, they're right. It should take that. Unfortunately, the world is not the way we necessarily want it to be, and how long something should take does not necessarily mean how much time it's actually going to take. So doing pilots enables you to get real hard data in order to find out what it's going to take to complete a project, so you schedule accordingly. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Courtney to talk about how once you've done your pilot, you can work on your scheduling your full rollout.
Thanks, Will. When scheduling the full rollout, you need to ensure there is sufficient coverage at the central help desk to handle call volume for all the necessary processes, which includes check-ins, troubleshooting, testing, and checkouts. We recently had a customer that had a very aggressive plan for 30 locations per night, and they assured us they had sufficient coverage at their help desk to handle the visits from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. in the morning. So we started doing it. Well, it turns out they only had 2 people at their help desk. So if you can imagine, you've got 30 technicians calling in over the span of 4 hours. Even though they were staggered, that's still a lot of people calling in. And the 2 people at the help desk were simply overwhelmed. In a few instances, we even had the technicians waiting for 2 hours to get calls back from the central IT help desk. And the technicians couldn't troubleshoot to test unless they had the help desk on the phone. If they had more coverage at their IT help desk, or if they spread the project out more, they would not have had the technicians standing around. The problem is that when you are dealing with technicians out in the field other than your own people, or they work for a third party like TST on a time and materials basis, anytime a technician is sitting there waiting for a callback, waiting for more information, waiting to test, it is time they are not productive. It's money you are spending, it's time you are spending, it's resources you are spending that simply is not productive. It's just adding to your total cost. It's not helping you out. So it's really critical to plan your own internal resources as well as external resources that you are bringing in. Another thing to think about, and it may seem silly, but make sure you are mindful of time zones. We've had some cases where customers kind of forgot that 10 p.m. Pacific time is actually 1 a.m. Eastern time, and that can create confusion if not properly monitored. So be sure time zones are double-checked prior to all scheduling. Also, always try to avoid the "it should take" trap. Make sure that when you're scheduling for a full rollout, you're basing completion times on what you found out with the pilot and the improvements you've been able to make. Don't assume everything is going to go perfectly. Our suggestion is that you plan for an extra 10 to 20% of time on average to deal with problems. Now, hopefully when you are dealing with an external vendor and you're working with someone that is going to base it on time and materials basis, that they are not going to charge you for travel, but you still want to add some time in. Hopefully they are not going to have to use it, but it's more for your internal staff so that if they need the extra time, they'll be able to finish up. Also, if you've got something planned to take an hour and the real estate or property management office opens at 9 a.m., you do not want to be starting that project at 8 a.m. You want to be starting that work at 7 a.m. This is so that if a problem comes up, they've got time to fix it and get it dealt with before your doors open. You don't want anything to prevent your locations from having to deal with shifted scheduling and office personnel, customers, or residents being inconvenienced because anything that impedes makes your staff, your managers, and ultimately your project sponsors and executives unhappy. So make sure you've got some extra time in there. You don't want to use it, but you want to have some padding so if you do run into it, you're still on track to get the work completed with limited interruption. Now that the rollout is done, you're still not finished, and I'm going to hand it over to Will, who is going to discuss closing out the project.
Thanks, Court. Closeout is an important part of the project. You want to make sure that all of your photos, documents, diagrams are collected from each site. You want to have a knowledge base for future work. Remember what I indicated in the story about the restaurant customer with their access point problem. They would have not had as much time and money spent with the swap out had they properly documented the location of where those access points were when they had installed them previously. So what we do at Tech Services Today is have a web portal where our customers can go and download all of the deliverables from each site. They can view them there. They can also download them and put them, let's say they have a SharePoint portal, whatever method you use, you want to make sure that you're gathering this for future information. Make sure that you review all of the completed work, and if there's any mistakes that were made or any exceptions that you've made to standard configurations or whatnot because of something unforeseen in the field, you want to make sure that you're documenting that. Again, the more things that happen, the more you know going forward, the better you're going to be able to take care of your sites. And then really important lessons learned. You want to sit down with your project team, sit down with any third parties that you're working with, and go through what went well and what needs to change, so that next time you work on this project, and there's never an end to IT projects, you'll be able to learn from those mistakes or unforeseen problems, so that you've got more information, and forewarned is forearmed, so that next time around it goes even more smoothly than it did on this one. All right, very good. Well, I promised to get us done within the half an hour, and we're there. So I'm going to go ahead and
I just wanted to jump in. I think Will's sound went out for a bit. So if anyone has any questions, if this is the time, feel free to ask, or you can text it to us, and we'll be happy to answer it back.
I just wanted to verify that the technicians have the ability to purchase equipment.
Yes, we do have the ability to get the equipment.
Okay, thank you.
All right, you're welcome. All right, well, thank you so much, everyone. And any questions that you weren't able to make, you're welcome to email us. We'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And thanks again for joining us. And we're also going to send you a copy of this webinar via email in the next 24 hours. All right, take care, everyone.
Thank you.